The first thing I noticed was the sunlight. It fell across 4 pale squares in Daniel and Brooke's living room rug, exactly where the legs of Thomas's piano had stood. The matching bench was still there, pushed against the wall as though someone had removed the heart of the instrument and forgotten the last piece. I stopped in the doorway, with my purse still hanging from my shoulder. "Where is the piano?" Brooke did not look embarrassed. She did not even put down the knife she was using to cut coffee cake into neat slices. "The auction company picked it up Thursday," she said. "The bidding closed last night." For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood her. Daniel sat at the table, stirring coffee he had not touched. My granddaughter Lucy stared down at her plate. No one looked surprised by my question. They had been waiting for it. Brooke wiped a crumb from the knife. "You weren't going to use it the way you used to, Maggie. We turned something sad into something useful." Thomas had spent nearly 4 years restoring that walnut baby grand. He had repaired every silent key by hand. He had sanded the damaged wood until it shone again. He had given it to me because he understood how much of my own music I had set aside while we built our family. Brooke had just called it something sad. On the tablet beside her plate, an auction listing was still open. "Restored walnut baby grand from the estate of Thomas Bell, offered by his son." His son? Not his wife, not Margaret Bell, not the woman who legally owned it and was standing 10 feet away, very much alive. Beside the tablet lay an overdue contractor's invoice. I saw the red stamp and several other bills clipped beneath it, but I did not yet understand what their financial trouble had to do with my piano. I set my purse on the back of a chair. "Who signed the ownership papers?" Daniel finally looked at me. "Mom, don't make this bigger than it needs to be." I held his eyes. "I am trying to understand how small you believed I had become." No one answered. I photographed the auction listing with my phone and set the tablet back where I had found it. They thought the sale was finished. It was not. The piano was still at the auction warehouse, and something bearing my name remained hidden inside it. But first, I needed to learn exactly what my son had done. "When did you first know they were selling it?" I asked. Daniel looked toward Brooke before answering. That glance told me more than his words did. "I knew about it," he said. "Brooke handled the details." "What details?" Neither of them spoke, so I pulled out a chair and sat down. "When was it appraised?" Brooke placed the knife beside the cake. Her hand trembled once before she folded it into her lap. "A few weeks ago." "Who contacted the auction company?" "I did," she said, but Daniel agreed. "Who signed the consignment papers?" Daniel rubbed his thumb along the handle of his coffee cup. "I signed them." Lucy remained so still that even her fork had not moved. I asked where the piano was, whether the winning bidder had collected it, and whether the money had been released. Brooke kept calling it a family decision, though I could not remember being invited into it. "The piano is at the warehouse," Daniel finally said. "The buyer hasn't picked it up yet." "And the money?" "Not yet." That was the first useful answer I received. Brooke leaned toward me and used the careful voice people often use when they want cruelty to sound reasonable. "When your wrist is better, we can buy you a digital piano, something smaller, easier for you to manage." I looked past her at Thomas's empty bench. They believed one instrument could replace another because they knew its price, but not its worth. I finished my coffee. "Thank you for setting the table, sweetheart," I told Lucy. Outside, I sat in my car and wrote down the auction company's name before shock could blur it. I did not cry. Not yet. Before I reached my driveway, one question had settled heavily inside me. Why had Daniel believed he had the right to sign? I was 73 years old then, a widow for almost 4 years, and retired from a lifetime of teaching music to elementary school children. I had spent decades telling nervous students that every note mattered, even the quiet ones. Somewhere along the way, my own family had begun treating my voice like background noise. I grew up in western Pennsylvania, in a house where money was counted carefully. My father repaired appliances, and my mother cleaned offices after dark. They could not afford regular music lessons, but they found a retired church organist who taught me twice a month. By 19, I had earned a partial scholarship to a conservatory. Then life changed quickly. Thomas and I married. I became pregnant with Daniel. A few months later, Thomas badly injured his hand and could no longer work regularly in his repair shop. I declined the scholarship. I took a clerical job during the day and taught beginner piano lessons at night. Years later, I completed my teaching degree, one course at a time, and spent more than 30 years in public schools. I never regretted becoming Daniel's mother. He was not the reason my life became smaller. He was one of the reasons I worked so hard to make it steady. The pain was realizing that he had grown up inside that steadiness without ever asking what it had cost. Thomas understood. He never treated what I gave up as something a wife or mother simply owed. Sometimes he apologized for benefiting from choices I had made willingly. I always told him there was nothing to forgive. After he died, the house became quieter, but I did not become incapable. I paid my bills, reviewed my insurance, balanced my accounts, and kept every important paper in labeled folders. Still, Daniel liked to say I did not enjoy dealing with complicated things. What he meant was that I often let him feel useful. Over time, the help I gave him stopped feeling temporary. After Thomas died, Daniel called more often. Sometimes he needed me to pick Lucy up from school. Sometimes Brooke had a client meeting and asked if I could keep her for the afternoon. I made holiday meals, covered an unexpected repair, and listened whenever Daniel said he needed advice. Most of the time, he had already decided what he was going to do. Then Brooke's home staging business lost several major clients. Daniel told me they were falling behind on the mortgage and needed help until things settled. I began transferring $1,200 into their account each month. 6 months, Daniel said. That should get us through. 6 months passed, then 8, then 10. He never raised the subject again, and I did not force it. I told myself Lucy needed stability. I told myself Brooke was working hard. That was how temporary help became part of their monthly income. Brooke also began speaking about my future, as though the decisions had already been made. When you eventually downsize, that dining set would work beautifully in our house. When we have to clear this place, we should donate most of these books. We need to decide what should stay in the family. I was usually standing right there. When I objected, Daniel called it practical planning. No one is trying to rush you, Mum. We're just thinking ahead. But I noticed the pattern. They consulted me when they needed my time, my cooking, my car, or my money. When a decision involved something of mine, I was often informed afterward. Lucy was the reason I kept smoothing things over. She was affectionate and curious, and she loved sitting beside me at the piano. I did not want tension with her parents to cost me those Wednesday afternoons. Brooke was not unkind every day. She sent flowers on my birthday. She brought soup when I had the flu. She loved her daughter and worked hard to keep her business alive. Those gestures made it easier to excuse the moments when kindness disappeared. The first time Brooke called it Thomas's piano instead of mine, I corrected her. The second time, Daniel smiled and said, "Mum, don't be so particular about words." But Thomas had been particular about that piano. He found it in the basement of an old church outside town. It was a walnut baby grand, though there was nothing grand about it then. Water had stained one side. Several keys made no sound. The music rack was cracked, the lid was badly scratched, and one brass pedal had been worn almost smooth. Most people saw a ruined instrument. Thomas saw work worth doing. He brought it home in pieces, and for nearly 4 years it occupied the back half of his workshop. I can still remember the smell of wood polish on his shirts when he came inside for supper. He kept screws and hinges in small glass jars, each one labelled in his careful handwriting. Thomas always crossed his capital T twice, once near the top and once lower down, as though the first line had not quite finished the job. Some evenings, I stood in the workshop doorway while he tested one note at a time. A single, clear sound would rise through the dust, then another. Once, he showed me a small brass screw beneath the key cover. "Don't let anyone replace that with a modern one," he said. "It belongs there." I laughed and told him no one else would ever be foolish enough to take the piano apart. When he finally finished, he brought me into the room and lifted the cover. The walnut shone softly in the afternoon light. Every key answered. Thomas rested one hand on the piano. "This one is not for the life you missed," he said. "It is for the life that is still yours." The receipt was in my name. So was the insurance. Years later, when our attorney prepared Thomas's estate inventory, the piano was excluded because it had never belonged to him legally. It was mine. After Thomas died, I kept playing. Although certain melodies made the house feel too full of him and too empty at the same time. Then I needed surgery on my right wrist. Rather than let Lucy stop practicing, I had the piano moved temporarily to Daniel and Brooke's house. Brooke sent me a message that afternoon. "Thank you for loaning Lucy such a beautiful instrument. I kept it because I kept every important record. I believed the piano was safe because it was helping Lucy. I did not know that while I was at physical therapy, a stranger in white gloves had already begun deciding its price. The woman first came up in an ordinary conversation. Lucy and I were working through a scale when she said, 'That lady said the wood was in really good condition.' I stopped playing. 'What lady?' Lucy glanced toward the kitchen. 'The one who looked at the piano while you were at therapy.' When I asked Brooke, she said the woman had only checked it for insurance purposes. Because Brooke worked with furniture, appraisers, and home staging companies, the explanation sounded reasonable. I let it go. After the brunch, I started asking more careful questions. The woman had not been there for insurance. Brooke had arranged a formal appraisal. The piano was valued somewhere between $14,000 and $18,000. Within days, Brooke contacted a regional auction company. Daniel knew before the catalogue was published. Lucy was told not to mention the appraisal again. When she later explained why, she repeated Brooke's words exactly. "Mom said you get attached to things, and it would be kinder to tell you after everything was settled." Kinder. They had replaced Lucy's practice time with a digital keyboard and described the baby grand in the auction catalogue as part of Thomas's estate because, according to Brooke, buyers liked a family history angle. They were willing to use my husband's history to sell the piano while leaving its living owner out of the story. The contractor's invoice I had seen at brunch was only part of their trouble. The kitchen renovation was unfinished. Brooke had business credit card balances, overdue contractor payments, and equipment expenses. Even the highest auction estimate would not have solved everything. It would simply have postponed the moment when they had to admit how far behind they were. I understood financial fear. I understood lying awake, wondering which bill could wait. I had supported a family through Thomas's injury on a clerical salary and piano lessons taught after supper. What I did not understand was deciding that fear gave you the right to sell something belonging to someone else. Brooke had chosen the piano because she believed I was the safest person to hurt. I was older. I avoided scenes. I loved Daniel. I adored Lucy. She expected me to absorb the loss quietly. That afternoon, Daniel called. "Mum, please don't contact the auction company yet. Let's talk as a family before this gets out of hand." I looked at Thomas's empty piano bench. "It was already a family matter," I said. "You simply left me out of it." The next evening, Daniel came to my house alone. He stood in the front room with his coat still on, looking toward the bench. "Mum, we can fix this." I did not offer him coffee. I waited. He began with the size of the piano. "It was too large for my house," he said. "Too difficult to maintain. My wrist might never be strong enough to play the way I once had." Then he mentioned Lucy. "She likes the digital keyboard. It has headphones. It's more practical." I watched him gather reasons, as though enough of them might become permission. Brooks' business was under pressure. The contractor had been calling. The auction money could pay several bills. They had even discussed buying me something smaller later. Something easier for a woman my age. I let him finish. "When did you first know Brooke had listed it?" Daniel looked down at the rug. "A few days before the auction closed." "How many?" He sighed. 3. 3 days in which he could have called, driven over, or simply told his wife the piano was not theirs. "Why didn't you call me?" His face tightened. "Because you would have said no, Mom. We needed a decision, not another argument." There it was. Not confusion, not a mistake, not Brooke acting behind his back. He had avoided asking because he already knew my answer. "Then you understood it was mine." "I understood you were attached to it." That sentence ended the last excuse I had been making for him. He viewed my ownership as sentiment. His financial need, in his mind, carried more weight. Daniel stayed a few more minutes, asking me to think about the family and not make things harder. I remember nodding once, although I was no longer listening. After he left, I locked the door and sat on the abandoned piano bench. For the first time since brunch, I cried. I remembered Thomas testing a restored key late at night, listening until the note rang clean. I remembered how carefully he had returned music to my life. Daniel had known exactly what he was doing. He had simply believed loving him would keep me from stopping him. When the tears passed, I went to the hall cabinet and took out Thomas's estate folder. They thought I had gone quiet. I had only gone careful. By 9 o'clock Monday morning, I was sitting across from Ellen Ward with the folder open between us. Ellen had handled our documents during the final year of Thomas's illness. She was not dramatic, and she did not promise anything before reading the facts. We began with the strongest evidence. The original purchase receipt named me as the buyer. Brooks' own message described the piano as a loan. The serial number matched my insurance records, and Thomas's estate papers confirmed that the instrument had never been part of his property. "It was never his to leave to Daniel," Ellen said. Then she examined the limited financial power of attorney I had given my son before my wrist surgery. It allowed him to view certain account information and pay approved bills if I could not manage them. It did not give him permission to sell my personal property. "The buyer has paid a deposit," Ellen explained, "but the piano has not been delivered, and the auction house is still holding the funds. We need to send a written ownership dispute immediately." She prepared the notice that morning and attached copies of the supporting records. Nothing would be solved by lunchtime. The auction company had to review the documents, contact the parties, and decide whether delivery could legally proceed. I appreciated the honesty. Before I left, Ellen asked whether I wanted Daniel's financial authority to remain in place. He had not taken money from my accounts, but continued access required trust. After what he had done with the piano, I no longer believed that trust was justified. I signed the revocation. Ellen sent copies to Daniel, my bank, and my investment advisor. I did not stop the monthly mortgage transfer that day. I wanted the piano protected before making any other decision. Ellen did not promise me a miracle. She gave me a process. Brooke called less than 2 hours after the auction company received our notice. Her voice was soft at first. "Maggie, we're worried this stress is too much for you." I stood at my kitchen counter and watched the kettle begin to tremble. "The stress did not begin when I objected," I said. She paused, then changed direction. Delivery had been postponed. The buyer's money was being held. Nothing would be released until ownership was reviewed. Brooke explained that the transaction could move forward quickly if I signed a release confirming Daniel's authority. "The contractor has employees waiting to be paid," she said. "Real people are depending on this." So was I. By her third call, concern had become accusation. You are making a family problem public. You made it public when you listed my property for strangers. She hung up without saying goodbye. The next day, Daniel called from outside my bank. He had tried to ask about one of my accounts and had been told his authority was no longer valid. Why have you suddenly stopped trusting me? The word suddenly almost made me laugh. Trust did not disappear suddenly, Daniel. It was spent gradually. He reminded me that he had never taken money from my accounts. That isn't the point, I said. I gave you access because I trusted your judgment. You used your judgment to sign away something that was not yours. That evening, Brooke emailed the release form. I printed it and read every line. It asked me to confirm that Daniel had permission to sell the piano, and that I had no claim against the auction company or the buyer. I placed it beside Thomas's estate folder and left it unsigned. Daniel and Brooke had already promised part of the expected money to the contractor. Without it, their debts remained exactly where they had been before they decided my piano should solve them. I did not enjoy their panic. There is no pleasure in watching your child face a problem you once would have rushed to fix. But rescuing Daniel again would have taught him that my boundaries lasted only until his next emergency. The call from the auctioneer came before I made coffee the following morning. Her name was Helen Carver. "Mrs. Bell," she said, "we found something inside the piano during inspection. It appears to be addressed to you." My hand tightened around the phone. Where? Beneath the keybed. Several keys had begun sticking after transport. When Helen partially removed the mechanism to confirm the serial number and inspect the problem, she found a narrow linen envelope secured beneath the wooden frame. My name was written across the front. Helen told me the envelope would remain sealed until the ownership meeting. She wanted everyone present, along with the records Ellen had submitted. I agreed. I had barely set the phone down when Lucy sent me a message. "Can I come over after school? Just me." She arrived carrying her backpack against her chest. The moment I opened the door, she said, "Grandma, are you mad at me?" I took her coat and hung it beside mine. "No, sweetheart, but I need you to tell me the truth." We sat at the kitchen table. Lucy kept turning the zipper on her backpack between her fingers. She told me she had watched the woman in white gloves examine the piano. "Mom told me not to mention it again," she said. "She said you would get confused because of Grandpa." "Confused?" Lucy's eyes filled. "She said you get sentimental, and sometimes sentimental people can't make practical decisions." My age and grief had not only been dismissed, they had been used as reasons to keep me uninformed. Lucy admitted that Daniel knew about the auction. Brooke had promised to replace the baby grand with a digital keyboard, and Lucy had assumed the piano belonged to her father because it had once stood in Thomas's workshop. "I didn't know it was yours," she whispered. "I know." She looked toward the empty bench. "Was it ever supposed to be mine?" "Perhaps one day," I said. "But gifts have to be given. They cannot be taken early." Lucy then remembered that the appraiser had struggled with several keys near the middle. Brooke had complained that something underneath kept catching when the mechanism moved. I brought out Thomas's restoration album. We turned the pages together. There were photographs of damaged wood, numbered wires, felt hammers, and Thomas leaning over the open frame. In one faded picture, he was sliding the keybed forward. Near his elbow lay what might have been a narrow envelope. Thomas sometimes stored repair cards and serial information inside the furniture he restored. He believed records should remain with the object they described. I still did not know what Helen had found. But I knew Thomas had never wanted Daniel to feel guilty for the life I chose. He wanted him to respect the woman who had made that choice. Before I could open the envelope, I had to sit across from the two people who had tried to sell the piano without me. The ownership meeting took place in a private inspection room at the auction warehouse. The piano stood behind a long folding table with its key cover open. Under the fluorescent lights and surrounded by packing blankets, it looked less like an instrument than an object waiting to be processed. Ellen sat beside me. Daniel and Brooke sat across from us. Helen and an auction house manager took the remaining chairs. The manager explained that bidding had closed and the buyer had paid a deposit, but the piano had not been delivered. Final inspection and serial verification were still incomplete when my claim arrived. Helen remained professional. "We are not deciding family history," she said. "We are determining who had authority to consign the instrument." Ellen presented the purchase receipt bearing my name and Brooke's message acknowledging the loan. She summarized the matching insurance, serial, delivery, and estate records. Then she placed Daniel's consignment warranty on the table. His signature appeared beneath a statement, confirming that he owned the piano or had full authority to sell it. Brooke shifted in her chair. "The piano came through Thomas," she said. "Daniel is his only son. It was always going to stay in the family." I looked at her. "How does something remain in the family after you sell it to a stranger?" She looked away. Daniel rubbed both hands over his face. "I thought Dad would have wanted it to help us. We were in an emergency." "Your emergency existed before I knew about it," I said. "My objection did not create your debt." The auction house manager closed the file. "Based on the records provided, Mr. Bell did not have ownership authority. We cannot complete the sale. The buyer will be refunded." Brooke asked about the money they had expected. "There will be no proceeds. You remain responsible for the reasonable transport and administrative costs stated in your agreement." Her face hardened. "So that's it?" she asked me. "A piano matters more than your own family?" "I care about the difference between asking for help and taking what was never offered." Daniel leaned forward. "No one meant to hurt you, Mum. You knew I would say no." He lowered his eyes. "The hurt was the part you expected me to carry so you would not have to deal with it." The room fell silent. Helen waited until the decision had been formally recorded. Then she crossed to a cabinet and returned with a narrow linen envelope. My name was written across the front. The capital T had been crossed twice. My fingers shook as I loosened the flap. Inside was a copy of the original receipt, a card bearing the piano's serial number, and a faded photograph of me at 19, seated at the conservatory audition piano. Daniel picked up the photograph before I could unfold the letter. He studied it for several seconds. "I've never seen this," he said. "No," I answered. "You knew me after I became your mother." Brooke glanced at the photograph too. For the first time that day, her expression lost its hardness. She looked from the young woman in the picture to me, then folded her hands in her lap. Beneath the photograph was Thomas's letter, dated shortly after he completed the restoration. He wrote that he had restored the piano for me, because I had placed my own music aside, whenever our family needed something more urgent. He said I had never used those choices to make him or Daniel feel indebted. Then he wrote, "This piano belongs to you. It is yours to keep, lend, sell, or give away. If you decide one day that Lucy should have it, let it be your gift to her. Its future should be whatever you choose." The final paragraph was shorter. "Our son grew up inside the life your choices helped build. I hope he always remembers the woman behind those choices." I placed the letter in front of Daniel. He read it slowly. When he reached the final paragraph, his shoulders lowered. He did not argue or look toward Brooke for help. He simply stared at his father's handwriting. I had imagined that moment in several different ways. In none of them did I feel triumphant. I felt tired. I felt loved by a man who had been gone 4 years, and I felt the full weight of what my son had chosen not to see. "Dad didn't know this would happen," Daniel said quietly. "No," I answered. "He knew me." He looked up. "Your father did not leave me instructions for punishing you. He reminded me that I was allowed to choose." The piano did not come home that afternoon. The auction company needed several days to complete the buyer's refund, prepare the release documents, and arrange transport. During that time, I finished what I had begun with Ellen. Daniel's financial authority remained revoked. I sent written notice that the monthly $1,200 transfers would end after the current month. I did not ask him to repay what I had already given. Those payments had been gifts, and I would not pretend otherwise, simply because he had misused my trust. Lucy's education fund remained protected, but Ellen helped me arrange independent management, so neither Daniel nor Brooke would control it. When Daniel called to ask whether I was really ending the support, I said, "I was helping you protect your home. I did not agree to finance it by giving up pieces of mine." He accused me of letting one mistake define him. "You treated my permission as something to get around," I said. "I cannot give you the same access and pretend that means nothing." Recovering the piano was easier than deciding what part of my son I could still trust. At first, Daniel reacted more strongly to the end of the monthly payments than he had to his father's letter. "You're punishing Lucy," he said, "and Brooke's business is already in trouble. Lucy's education fund is protected. What has ended is my responsibility for maintaining your household." He did not like hearing it stated so plainly. Without the auction proceeds or my monthly transfer, Daniel and Brooke had to face the numbers they had been avoiding. They suspended the remaining luxury work in the kitchen, negotiated a payment schedule with the contractor, reduced Brooke's business expenses, and began meeting with a financial counselor. Those choices were not dramatic. They were simply the choices they should have considered before deciding my piano was available. Brooke remained defensive. She called the sale a desperate mistake and said I could not understand the pressure of keeping a business alive. I reminded her that I had supported a family through Thomas's injury, worked 2 jobs, and completed my degree 1 class at a time. That was different, she said, though her voice was quieter than before. Perhaps it was. By then, I no longer needed her agreement. Several weeks later, Daniel mailed me a letter. He admitted that he knew I would refuse the sale. He wrote that he had assumed my anger would pass because it always had before. He acknowledged that he had begun treating my $1,200 as part of his income instead of help I could stop whenever I chose. The hardest sentence was this: "I protected myself from conflict with Brooke by allowing you to carry the hurt instead." That was the first apology that sounded like truth. I wrote back, "I believe you are sorry. Trust will require more than believing you." I did not restore his authority. I did not restart the payments. Lucy continued visiting every Wednesday under clear arrangements made directly with her parents. I never asked her to carry messages or choose sides. The family had not returned to what it was. But when the piano came home, I understood that returning did not have to mean going backward. It arrived on a rainy Thursday morning. 2 movers carried it through my front door while I stood beside the empty bench, holding my breath. There was a narrow scratch along the walnut finish where a transport strap had rubbed against the wood. I called Peter Walsh, one of Thomas's former apprentices. He repaired it carefully, though a faint line remained whenever the light struck it from the side. Peter offered to work on it again. "No," I said. "Leave a little of it." The piano had been damaged, taken away, and returned. The faint mark did not make it less worthy of care. We placed it near the front room window where Thomas had always liked it. After Peter finished tuning it, I pressed 1 key near the middle. The note filled the room cleanly. For a moment, I could almost smell wood polish on Thomas's shirt. I stored his letter with the receipt, insurance records, and estate papers. It did not belong hidden beneath the keys anymore. My wrist improved, although my fingers moved more slowly than they once had. Lucy returned for her Wednesday lessons, and neither of us mentioned the auction every time we sat down. One afternoon, she brought out the faded conservatory photograph and placed it on the music rack. "Will you play what you were going to play at the audition?" she asked. I had not touched that piece in more than 50 years. The first notes came carefully. Lucy joined me on the upper keys, watching my hands whenever she was uncertain. Halfway through, she struck the wrong note and stopped. "I'm sorry. You don't have to start over because one note went wrong," I told her. "You listen, find your place, and continue." She took a breath and began again. As our hands moved beside each other, I understood that I had not only been speaking about music. Daniel and Brooke had treated the piano as though I were already finished with it. In time, I realized they had begun looking at more than the piano that way. My home, my money, my choices. They spoke of inheritance as though it had already begun. But an inheritance is what someone chooses to leave behind. It is not permission to begin taking while they are still here. I still loved my son. I still hoped he would become more honest with himself. But love did not require permanent access, and peace did not require pretending trust had never been broken. Have you ever had to remind someone that your kindness was a gift, not permission? And do you still keep something that carries the memory of a person who truly saw you? They thought I was finished. I had only found my place.